Now, back to a couple of guys who believe Rin Tin Tin may have rusted to death. It's the Mid-Michigan Pet Expert Talk Show on 1320 WILS.
Welcome back to the Mid-Michigan Pet Expert Talk Show. Rick, in this segment, we've got a very distinguished guest in studio with us. We would like to introduce to our listeners Dr. Elizabeth Carr, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine and Assistant Professor at the Department of Large Animal Clinical Sciences for Michigan State University. Welcome to the studio, Betsy. We appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Betsy, if you can help our audience understand, we've been talking a little bit about horses over the last couple of weeks because of the wild horse auction that's taking place in Midland. I'd like to kind of understand from your perspective, how do you go about caring for a horse? Because I would imagine it's got to be a lot tougher than bringing your dog with you to the vet because of the size and all of the things involved with that. Can you help the listeners understand exactly how you go about doing what you do?
Sure. When I talk to clients about the possibility of purchasing a horse, there's three really big areas I tell them to focus on. One is housing. What is the ideal way to house a horse, and what are your options if you don't have the ideal way to house a horse? Feeding, which in today's world, we tend to feed horses very differently than they have evolved to eat. So understanding that and then working with what you have to try to, maximize giving them the ideal food, but also work with what you have available. And then the third big thing is the veterinary or the preventative medicine, the same things you would do when you bring your dog to the vet. So what are the vaccines, parasite control, and other basic health care? The big one for a horse would be dental care because their teeth do erupt their entire lives. So those are the three areas that if you are going to take on a horse, you need to recognize that probably yearly you need to have a veterinarian come out and at least consider or discuss with him the appropriate vaccines, deworming, and dental care.
Now, when you say that the food, the eating has changed over time, help me understand what you mean by that. How did horses naturally eat, and how have we changed their diets, and why have we done that?
So horses have evolved to eat roughage and fairly poor quality roughage on the plains, grasses, hays, things like that. And their gastrointestinal tract is designed to digest that very effectively. And nowadays, we produce our own hay, obviously, which is a major source or should be the major part of a horse's diet. We actually produce very good quality hay in some situations. The higher the number in terms of cutting, the richer the hay quality, particularly with respect to carbohydrates. And so we take an animal that's meant to actually eat poor quality roughage and we feed them high quality roughage, which is not only high in carbohydrates, but actually decreases the amount of food they can take in, just as if I ate candy bars all day versus celery. On top of that, we tend to feed a lot of grain products, which are called concentrates, and they actually aren't evolved to eat those. They quite like them, and they're a great source of energy. So if you need to put weight on a horse, particularly a high-performance horse like a racehorse, they are often a necessary component, but their GI tract is not designed to digest that well, and we sometimes see consequences from feeding those types of diets.
I have a question then. Is there an effort underfoot, so to speak, that would take horse owners and want to embrace other feeding habits and farmers to culture other types of foods? Maybe, what sounds like a less quality hay. Is there any effort to do that?
Certainly in educating our clients, that's one of the things we emphasize is really what's the best thing to feed your horse. There's always going to be the person that wants to feed the fancy food or the, horses. If you offer a horse first cutting grass hay versus third cutting alfalfa hay, I can pretty much guarantee they'll pick the third cutting alfalfa. Sure. It tastes better, just like candy does to me. So there's that little bit of a struggle between trying to teach people what's ideal and then what they want to feed. And most people will feed a good quality hay, whether it's grass or alfalfa, and it's probably adequate. The problems arise when you feed very rich hay and you have a horse that's either what we would call an easy keeper, so they don't need a lot of calories. And then you get into problems with either the amount of time they can eat or they get obese. And horses have the same kind of obesity-related problems that people do. The other thing with feeding in horses is if you look at wild horses or horses that are feral that are studied for behavior, they spend about 60% of their day eating. That's their happy place to be. It's about half their day eating. If you then take that animal and feed them a very good quality hay or grain and cut back their feeding time to maybe 3 meals of an hour a day, you're really affecting their behavior, affecting what their level of stress, et cetera. And so we see consequences associated with that.
And is there any, I suppose, is there any way to get them that 60% or even 30% back, or is that not a feasible option with enough acreage to do that?
Absolutely, it's a feasible option. It would depend on the horse, how easy a keeper it is, and the quality of your grass. For example, an ideal would be a horse out on grass pasture that can eat as much as he wants all day. Some horses will get fat on that, so it does have to be adjusted to try to keep them healthy. Or you can feed them hay, whatever quality you need to feed so that you can feed them the largest amount of time or meals throughout a day. Ideally, if you don't have pasture, we often recommend if you can feed a horse hay divided, let's say, 4 to 6 times a day, if you have that ability, that's going to make that animal happier, that it's got frequent meals rather than morning and night, 2 meals a day.
And kind of expecting it throughout the day.
Exactly.
It thinks and it anticipates, and as long as it's regular and consistent, that's always the big message. Let's go back a little bit because I think we're a little ahead of ourselves. Nutrition is fantastic, but let's just start with the basic, how much space do you need and how do you accommodate that, and what's adequate, what do you commonly see, and what's ideal for them as far as space and accommodations.
Horses obviously didn't evolve to live in stalls, so the idea that they have to have a stall is probably not necessary. There are also zoning regulations, so you need to check within your county to see what they require in terms of acreage. If you want to be able to pasture your horse and get grass diet for at least the period of time that we have grass around, you probably need realistically an acre or 2 of pasture per horse. I have 3 horses and about 3.5 acres, and I struggle to give them grass all year. So housing-wise, whether you keep them out in pasture and have a shed for shelter, ideally they should have some sort of shelter because they will, in the wild again, get out of bad weather by going towards whether it be, forests or rocky outcroppings. So a shelter is an ideal situation, whether it's a 3-sided shed or a stall they can go into. Something like that is also ideal.